Please like, share and subscribe for more videos. Thank you.
Welcome to another series from me, Ginger GM Simon Williams. I'm a Grandmaster and I use various checkmate patterns throughout my career. And in this series, which is going to contain at least 15 videos, maybe more, I'm going to show you a number of patterns that you can use in your own games. We're going to start off with the fairly simple ones, and then we're going to go to more abstract ones that you may have not seen. This first video is concentrating on Fool's Mate, which is the quickest checkmate possible. So called because only a fool will fall into it. And there is some alliteration from me. That's why I'm a Grandmaster. So, what is Fool's Mate? Well, let's show you the very basics of it first. Fool's Mate is where white plays something along the lines of f3, and now after a move like e5, opening up the bishop and the queen, the horrendous move g4. And this is such a bad move because black can now take advantage of this weakened diagonal, the h4 e1 diagonal, by playing queen to h4, checkmate. Not a good way to finish the game from white. Now, Fool's Mate is really something you shouldn't see too often. It's a checkmate where one side has to be very cooperative, because in this example, white has to play bad moves in order to lose. Black doesn't do anything special. So really, Fool's Mate is something which occurs when one player plays very badly at the start of the game. And Fool's Mate is really the most important characteristics of this is the weakening of this diagonal if white is the fool, or some cases the weakening of this diagonal, the h5 e8 diagonal, if black is the fool. So let's have a look at a couple more examples of this. Okay, well, in another game, white started with d4, and he lost only a couple of moves later. You might be thinking, how? Well, knight to f6 was played by black, and now knight to d2. Already a rather surprising and inferior move. This blocks in the bishop, and also the pawn on d4 now has no protection from the queen, so the knight is not on a good square. Black aims to take advantage of this by playing e5, a kind of gambit line to gain a bit of time and to try to trap white. It works perfectly. White grabs that pawn. Now black places his knight upon g4, aiming to win back the pawn, but also with some other ideas in mind. White gives the knight a kick, thinking, okay, I'll give my pawn back, but I'll be safe. But he misses a really important move now. Can you see the move? Knight to e3, a devastating move. And in this position, white resigned only on move 4. Oh my words, imagine that happening, because he's going to lose his queen, and that's quite serious. Or if he captures the knight, again, he has weakened this diagonal. Remember, for Fool's Mate, this diagonal, when it's happening to white, is the key diagonal. And after queen to h4 check, it's worth noting the white pawn is on h3, so you can't really go g3 before that pawn was defended, because queen takes g3 is checkmate. Again, another example is Fool's Mate. Now, in order for this to work, really one side has to play a loosening move like f4, f5, or move their g-pawn and move their g-pawn. So another example of this, which has occurred actually in far too many games, is when white goes f4. So already white is asking for this diagonal to come under attack. This is not a serious problem if white knows what he's doing. But here, a very dangerous reply to this is the Fromm's Gambit, e5. It's slightly in the same spirit as the last gambit we saw. Black gives up a pawn to gain quick development. And here there are two ways white can fall into Fool's Gambit. Number one is if he tries to guard his pawn with the very bad move g3. The point being, after pawn takes f4, white should now not take the pawn because he's weakened his diagonal, and queen to h4 is yet another example of Fool's Mate. One of my favourite Fool's Mate that I show juniors I'm teaching is if white captures on e5 and now black plays d6, trying to accelerate his development after pawn takes d6, bishop takes d6, and also creating a deadly threat. Can you see the threat here? Well, It's often happened where white hasn't seen the threat and has played a move like knight to c3, really not paying attention to his weakened diagonal. Now queen to h4 check, and it's going to be checkmate very quickly. White has to play g3, but in this example, black has 2 pieces attacking that pawn, so black can play even queen takes g3. And I have to say, I love sacrificing my queen, so I'd rather take there with my queen than my bishop, because my opponent might get excited. And I love showing kids this because the kids go, I can win your queen, yay! But after bishop takes g3, you might win my queen, but you lose the game. Thank you very much. And we've only looked at this so far from the example of white being the fool. So now let's have a look at one last example of black now being the fool. And after the starting move pawn to d4, f5 is a move I often play, the so-called Dutch defense. And one line which is very tricky is now bishop to g5, where black can try to chase this bishop away with h6. The bishop moves, and now g5. And now let's say the bishop moves again. Black has to be very careful here because he's moved his f-pawn and his g-pawn, weakening the diagonal towards his king. So if he continues with f4, a much better move, by the way, would have been knight to f6 because that covers more squares, develops a piece. White can now play e3, and already queen to h5 is a threat. One very attractive game that occurred in this position between Teed and Delmar in 1896 occurred h5, trying to stop the queen coming in, and now a very surprising move, bishop to d3, because again you're leaving your bishop on pre here. Rook to h6, defending that square, but white has a forced checkmate here. Can you work it out? The rook is the only defender of that square, so you need to distract the rook. Queen takes h5. Don't you just love the way I'm finding ways to sacrifice my queen with fool's mate already? Rook takes h5, and now because the rook no longer defends g6, bishop to g6 checkmate. So fool's mate is really our first introduction to this series of checkmate patterns. Now don't fear if you're a high rated player. I have to start from the bottom and move through all the ones. But in the next couple of examples, they're already going to get much tougher. And I'm going to try to give simple cases and much more complex cases for each checkmate pattern. Like I said, I really didn't realize how many names, how many different checkmates there were out there. And this course and this series has really helped me just confirming those patterns. And that's my aim in this, to try to get you to think about these patterns, try to subconsciously remember them when you're playing your own games. So thank you for watching this video. I recommend you watch the other videos in this series. Bye for now.